I never got to talk about this fully in a video because in the short form videos I don't have enough time to, and I haven't done a long video in like a month. But sometime earlier this month, I'm not exactly sure of the day, but earlier this month was the 5-year anniversary of when I started doing these reviews. My first review was something I just posted on my private Facebook page, and then it went to the blog, and then this channel and the TikTok. And it's kind of crazy to think how much has changed since then. I went from just kind of reviewing these on my own to actually posting videos about them for an audience to watch. And in 2017, who would have thought that I would go on to be noticed by popular artists with my reviews? I'm very grateful that I get to do this, and I'm grateful that I have an audience that checks out my reviews. So thank you to you guys who support my work, whether it be people who have been here from the beginning or new viewers. I appreciate you all the same, and I hope over the next 5 to 10 years that I can continue to give you guys more content like this that you can enjoy and really rock with, like I'm gonna try to do now. Welcome back to 10 Years Later, the series where I talk about albums from the 2010s that were either impactful to me, impactful to music in general, very popular, or just worth revisiting 10 years later for good or bad reasons. And I've got 3 July 2012 albums to talk about, so let's get into the first one, which, as you can tell from the title, is the 2012 Chris Brown album, Fortune. Chris Breezy, you know him by now. This was his 5th studio album back in 2012 and the quick follow-up to his 2011 album, F.A.M.E. Born out of a desire to make that project a double disc record with about 25 to 30 songs, this just ended up being something of a sequel to F.A.M.E. with a whole new sound and concept, as opposed to a second disc with largely cut tracks from the 2011 album, which is what it may have ended up being. Initially, it was supposed to arrive just 6 months after F.A.M.E., but several delays led to it seeing a release over a year after that album. I looked at F.A.M.E. in this series last year, and while that album had its defenders, as I'm sure every Chris Brown album does, I couldn't really get behind it all that much, at least as a full project. It had scattered moments of success, but didn't really do much for me as a full body of work. And ignoring the personal side of Chris Brown for just a moment, I feel like that's the issue I've always had with him as an artist. I don't mind his stuff, and I even thought that the massive and unwieldy Heartbreak on a Full Moon with its 45-track length was a decent record. The thing is though, Chris Brown has rarely, if ever, read to me as an albums artist. He has some singles that I enjoy way more than I should in some cases, but despite being a talented artist, he's never been able to put all of that together into one strong, cohesive album. He feels like a quantity over quality artist, bogging down his records with too much filler and seemingly not giving enough checks and balances. Which brings me to this album, a 14-track, 54-minute record that I'm surprised to say is on the short end for a Chris Brown project. That is, until we hit the expanded edition, which is 22 tracks stretching an hour and 27 minutes, still feeling like it's on the short end for Chris Brown. I did listen to the expanded edition, but I won't be talking in too much detail about the extra tracks because very few of them are worth talking about. Just know that Calypso is a great track, Oh Yeah and Get Down are rough, and every other cut I had forgotten about while they were even playing. As for the bass album itself, this is another no from me. To get a little honest with you guys here, I always write the intros to these scripts after listening to the album. I know that sounds weird, but I'd rather nail down my thoughts on the tracks before writing the intro. So I didn't know until after listening to Fortune that this was supposed to be a second disc to F.A.M.E. Learning that made perfect sense to me. This record feels extremely unadventurous, almost like Chris just kinda took what he did with F.A.M.E. and thought, alright, let's do it again. This electronic pop bandwagon still has a little juice left in it before it collapses. Let's squeeze out whatever's left. The big thing that holds this album back even more than F.A.M.E. for me is the fact that there are so many songs that I can only really describe as dime a dozen. Be it thanks to a weak hook or homogeneous production, there's a severe lack of high points and a massive amount of tracks that are just total nothing burgers. There's Bassline, where my easiest sum up of the song is Take a Look at Me Now, remove the features, give it deeper electronic production, make the reverb about 45% more annoying, and boom, you've got a song. Or if you're looking for more dime a dozen moments, there's Till I Die, a standard electronic song with snares, a meh Big Sean verse, and a decent Wiz Khalifa verse. Mirage, which nicely moves back to something lighter and R&B influence with an okay Nas verse and another weak hook. Biggest Fan, a one night stand track with smooth vocals from Chris and 7th Streeter and not much else. Sweet Love, a ballady track that I honestly forgot about as soon as it was over. Stuck on Stupid, which was so unbelievably standard of a pop and R&B crossover that it became unmemorable. And 4 Years Old, which features some slightly more emotional writing from Chris Brown about how fame changed him, but it offsets that with some of the most forgettable average production on the record. There are some memorable moments here, but not all of them are memorable in a good way in my opinion. Turn Up the Music kicks off the album and shows that Chris Brown's previous experiments with electronic pop music didn't end on his last album. Unsurprisingly, almost every pop album was doing that at the time. Now I know this song from my youth, but I never actually got to listen to it fully until I sat down to listen to this album. Genuinely, I feel like I missed very little. See, the chorus is really catchy, and one I surprisingly find myself humming at least a little bit from time to time. The thing is, how many more of these kinds of songs do I have to listen to during this series? Once that beat drop began doing its thing, I was like, oh great, another one. At least I can give this song credit because the electronic direction doesn't really take away from Chris's vocal charm. Don't Wake Me Up is another big single that I honestly think I could have liked if not for a few things. I do think the chorus, despite its repetitiveness, can be catchy, and there are times where Chris fights through the auto-tune enough to where his voice can sound very nice. Keep in mind what I said. Chris's vocals are processed to hell at some points and make some parts sound awkward as hell. It turns what would have been a pretty decent electronic pop single into something super cringy. Don't Judge Me is something more ballady, which I could appreciate in how it lets Chris Brown remind us of how good a vocalist he is. It's got some very delicate, ethereal production that helps lift it, even though I think the song is knocked down by its awkward messaging. In general, telling someone don't judge me is a crapshoot because everyone judges subconsciously, but more specifically, Chris is asking his partner on the song not to judge him for cheating. I'm sorry, but if someone is a known cheater, their reputation is going to follow them and they are going to open themselves up to being judged. Your words can only mean so much in terms of justifying your past decisions. Saying I'm not who I was won't matter if you don't actively work on it with your actions, because past actions can bleed into the present. I know that was a bit of a tangent, but that's just a way for me to say the message felt poorly thought out. The song isn't bad, but the writing feels awkward. 2012 is also a ballady R&B cut, but this time Chris played into the 2012 hysteria that the world would end. Boy, do I remember that all too well. By making a sex-driven song. Because yes, if the world was about to end in 2012, we'd all be fucking. My 14-year-old self that knew nothing about sex and still knows less than you'd think would totally be doing whatever that is. If nothing else, by my count, I have to give some credit that it took until July of 2012 for a song from a mainstream artist to make some reference to that 2012 world-ending nonsense. So at least we know who wasn't cringy. And yeah, this song is cringe. Even if it sounds okay, it's a lyrical hodgepodge of awkwardness. Ironically, I really like the track Strip, though I feel like its success doesn't really give this album much in the way of points because it wasn't a song made for this record. It was originally made for Chris's 2011 Boy in Detention mixtape that became a buzz single for this album. How much stock can I put in the song helping the record when it was already on another project before this? Regardless, it is a more bouncy, almost twerk anthem-esque hip-hop song that has some really fun production combined with a really catchy hook that I had some trouble getting out of my head. Chris's vocals were nice, and the Kevin McCall verse, while not the greatest, was a fine addition. If nothing else, I'm glad I got something off of this album to rock with. And I also kind of like the Party Hard / Cadillac interlude, which is hardly an interlude given that it's a 2-part 5-minute cut. Either way, the first part, Party Hard, is a typical poppy track that at least has a decent hook and some pretty smooth vocals that make it a nice vibe. Cadillac, on the other hand, is where it really hits its stride, being an a cappella track featuring Chris and 7th Streeter. It's a pretty beautiful moment that I think still would have been impactful if it was its own track. Thankfully, the overall song is pretty good, even if the two parts don't really have much sonic lack cohesion and don't feel like much of an interlude. Sadly, that's about as nice as I can be to this album, as the closer Trumpet Lights might be one of the lowest points it sinks to. It's another up-tempo electronic track with an instrumental that's loaded with what feels like bubbles popping. I don't know, there's so much going on here that just doesn't sound right at all, and while Chris and Sabrina Antoinette sound fine, the song as a whole just crashes and burns so hard. A rough ending to what was a pretty miserable album. Overall, yeah, this thing did very little for me, even less, I'd say, than F.A.M.E. And that album was only a year old at the time of this release, so do with that what you may. Even with the echoes of Chris's personal life in full view, I sometimes give his music a chance because I know that he's incredibly talented as a singer, and while this doesn't affect my review as a dancer, but I've learned it over 5 years of reviewing music and consuming music seriously. Having all the talent in the world isn't going to guarantee that you'll use it to your advantage or make a good album out of it. And for Chris Brown, this is another example of that. A lot of what's here feels like Chris going through the motions, jumping on the sound of what was popular in 2012, repackaging it, and then just sending it out. The album basically sounds like trying to copy your own homework. It's not far off from what F.A.M.E. was sonically, and it's even less interesting. The production becomes more homogenized, the hooks are less interesting, it's just not exciting. Chris is a talented vocalist, but even that element becomes watered down when his vocals are lathered in uninteresting filters, and sometimes the writing can be pretty rough. I'm sure his fans love this thing, but once again it feels like Chris isn't trying to win any new ones here. He's just trying to satisfy the ones that have stuck with him through his worst times. So, good for you all. I hope you defend and care about the people in your actual life as much as you care about a celebrity you don't know. Back in 2012, I don't know if I would have been too into this thing, especially given that I mentioned in my F.A.M.E. video that I wasn't too interested in Chris Brown at the time. Listening to it now, I think I like this even less than F.A.M.E. If I had to put it on my scale, yeah, it would get an awful rating from me. First 2012 album that I gave an awful rating to, though. Well, credit where it's due. It only took till July to make that happen. But regardless, yeah, another uninspired effort from Chris Brown that I think will only get mileage from his most hardened stands. But that's just my opinion on this album. What did you guys think about it? Did you listen to it back in 2012? Do you still listen to it now? Did you love it back then? Hate it back then? Do you still love it now? Do you still hate it now? Are you just completely indifferent toward it? Whatever your thoughts and experiences are, leave them down in the comments below. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe and support some of my other ventures that I have linked in the description, thank you. If not, it's no big deal. I totally understand. And as soon as this goes off, the next video that I'm going to be doing is going to be on Frank Ocean's Channel Orange. Very excited to talk about that album. So stay tuned for that, but until then, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.